I'm reading English, not German. I have just finished translating Harry Edwards' Life in Spirit into German. I've read it in England. It was a beautiful book Harry Edwards wrote. He passed away in 1976. And I felt like reading something completely different from one of my favorite authors, who is Joan Grant. And she wrote a book. She wrote many books, but this is called SCARLET FEATHER. And I really enjoyed it when I read it quite a few years ago. I bought quite a few more of her books because she was fascinating. Joan Grant was a seer. She started writing very early in her life, and she was the daughter of a well, I don't know whether he was a scientist. As I say, she was born in England in 1907, and her father was a man of such intellectual brilliance in the fields of mathematics and engineering that he was appointed a Fellow of King's College while still in his 20s. So Joan's formal education was limited to what she absorbed from a series of governesses, although she feels she learned far much more from after-dinner conversations between her father and his fellow scientists. And when Joan was 20, she married Leslie Grant, with whom she had a daughter. Marriage ended quite soon in 1937. She had written Winged Pharaoh, which is also a beautiful book, that became an instant bestseller. And until 1957, she was married to the philosopher and visionary Charles Beatty, who is the author of several books. Anyway, throughout her life, Joan has been preoccupied with the subject of ethics. To her, the word ethic represents the fundamental and timeless code of attitudes and behavior towards one another on which the health of the individual and society depends. As Dennis Kelsey had written, the first dynasty of Egypt once knew the code well but lost it and found it. 11 dynasties were to pass before it was recovered, but those were more leisurely times when the most lethal weapons was an arrow, a javelin, and a club. We feel that in the present troubled days of this planet, these books must be presented. She wrote stories of ancient Egypt and so on, and she had an amazing historical vision. And the Daily Telegraph said that The Scarlet Feather was an exciting and unusual love story, and it might also call to arms for the emancipation of women and men trapped in traditional roles. This is the story about Piyanaah. I want to say her name correctly. P-I-Y-A-N-N-A-H. Piyanaah, the heroine. She is of Scarlet Feather, and she is a member of a Native American tribe that has strayed from its noble heritage. Her clairvoyant mother refuses to accept the tribe's restrictions, brutality, and sexual segregation. So Piyanaah and her cousin Raki grow up as outsiders. When she learns that her father is Chief Nakachek, Piyanaah chooses to defy her people's traditions. Instead of learning the skills of a squaw alongside the other girls, she insists on undergoing the ordeals of a brave, overcoming daunting physical and spiritual challenges. Meanwhile, her beloved Raki learns from the squaws, thereby gaining the knowledge and empathic abilities of women. If their education is successful, Piyanaah and Raki will succeed the chief as a pair, as long as they can pass the final series of ordeals that will prove them worthy of the Scarlet Feather. So, I love this book, and I start from the beginning. Raki and Piyanaah, Part 1. Raki and I, Piyanaah, were together from the beginning. His mother died when he was born, and I was 3 days old, so we were suckled together. There were 2 of everything, 2 babies in the cradle, 2 breasts when we were hungry, 2 voices to comfort us if we cried. Later we recognized the voices as Mother, who was the most important, and Nini, who helped her to look after us. All things were happy because they were in pairs. Even the rocks and the trees had each a shadow to stop it being lonely. Raki and I shared all our discoveries. The hard, hot feeling in our mouth before teeth happened, the shape of stones, the interesting taste of grass and earth, the texture of skin and rush basket, and moss, and the beautifully loud noise we could make by shouting. We used to lie naked in the sun and watch the dance of the leaves, or play in the shallow waters which jumped up to laugh with us when we banged it with our hands. We learned that there are different kinds of warmth, mother and sunlight, and the deep, sleepy warmth of the beaver pelts in which we were wrapped together at night. Fire was warm too, but sometimes it got cross, like Nini, and hurt so badly that you had to cry. Cold took longer to learn. There was the friendly chill of wet grass in the early morning, the sharpness of spring water, and the beautiful coolness of licking shadowed stones on a hot day. Suddenly one morning the great white cold happened. It was soft and lovely, but when it grew tired of playing with us, it hurt nearly as much as the fire. It stayed on and on until we couldn't remember there had ever been anything but white outside the teepee. Raki knew what hot ashes felt like when my hand was burned, and I learned about ants when they stung his foot. I thought I should always follow Raki because I was his shadow, and the first time he went away from me I was so frightened that I screamed until Mother came to comfort me. She explained that I must learn to crawl too, so I did. After that I was careful to learn everything as fast as he could, so that we shouldn't be parted again. We learned to swim on the same day, and if he fell and cut his knee, I always cut mine before sunset. Once he ate some berries that gave him a very bad pain. I hadn't eaten any, but I pretended I had, so he shouldn't have the pain all by himself. Nini made us drink something very dark and bitter. After that, we both had a pain, so I didn't have to pretend anymore. Mother played with us and told us stories. She knew everything, and I could even make fire and moccasins. Nini didn't know very much and scolded us when she thought Mother wasn't listening, but she was nice when she was in a good temper. When we were 5, Mother told us we were all going to a new place. We were sorry at first, for there were so many special rocks and caves and trees that would be lonely if we went away. Then Raki said it would be a wonderful adventure, so we were both pleased. I don't think Mother wanted to go on a journey, for the night before we left, I was too excited to sleep and I thought I heard her crying. I still thought so when Raki said I must have made a mistake because grown-ups didn't cry. I had tried to find out where we were going to and why, but Mother only said we were going to a new place of the corn growing, because the tribe needed fresh hunting grounds. We didn't know what the tribe was, but Raki thought it was something to do with the people we occasionally saw in the distance. I wondered how we should be able to carry our 2 teepees and the wooden chest which took care of our clothes, but I needn't have worried about them, for one day Mother took us into the distant woods, as she had often done before, and after we walked a very long way, I asked when we should go home, and she said, "We are not going to turn back, Piyanaah. Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow we all be in a new place that has no memories." Then she walked ahead and we did not ask any more questions because we knew she was unhappy and didn't want to talk. Then Raki pointed to knife cuts on the trees and we knew someone had blazed a trail for us to follow. Further on there were many footprints in the dust, so we knew that many people were making the journey too. They must have been kind, if not friendly people, for at the end of each day we found a shelter made for us to sleep in, with food and a cooking pot beside it. Mother said they were the tribe, but when we asked what a tribe was, she said we didn't need to know yet. When Raki or I got tired of walking, Mother carried us on her back. We came to a river and waited for several days while canoes were built. Then Nini came from collecting firewood and said all the canoes had gone, but they had left one for us. We found it tied to a stake which was driven into the bank. Mother paddled in front and Nini at the back. Raki and I sat in the middle, and we were allowed to trail our hands in the water so long as we didn't splash Nini. Sometimes we saw other canoes ahead of us, and then Mother drew into the bank until they were out of sight. We thought it curious that she never wanted to thank the tribe, for they went on being kind. And every evening we saw a bunch of feathers hanging from a branch or tied to a stick in the bank, which showed us where they had prepared our sleeping place. Sometimes a fire had been lit and the food was ready for cooking. On those days, Nini was good-tempered and the food tasted better. Raki and I always ran ahead to see what had been left for us. Usually it was meat or wildfowl, but sometimes it was only a little cornmeal. And then we had to look for a stone on which Nini rolled the dough into flat cakes which she baked in the hot ashes. It was early spring and the nights were cold, but that didn't matter as Mother had brought the beaver robe for us to sleep in. When Nini was cross, she used to mutter to herself, and we found out that she thought we ought to live with the tribe, and that somehow it was Mum's fault that we didn't. But when we questioned Nini about it, she wouldn't answer. The tribe were incomprehensible, like the weather, something which affected you but had to be accepted without argument. Nini would always say they were looking for a new place of the corn growing, and that if they didn't find it, we should all go hungry next winter. I asked how they would know when they got there, and she said, "The chief will tell the elders." When I asked her what a chief was, she said, "Your father," then gasped as though she had swallowed a fly, and grabbed hold of my arm and said, "If you tell your mother I said that, I shall slap you so hard that you'll scream the moon out of the sky." So I knew that my father, being the chief, must be very important. Raki and I decided not to say anything about it to Mother, because when Nini was cross, she made things so disagreeable. We knew that everything had a father and a mother, but animals always had parents like themselves. We agreed it was a pity that I only had a chief, and Raki only had a scarlet feather for a father. We used to think that a scarlet feather was a kind of bird, but Mother said it was a specially brave kind of man. When Raki asked what his father's name was, Mother said she didn't know, for her sister, who was Raki's mother, had never told her. It was exciting when we came to a rapid. Nini was frightened on them and used to pull a blanket over her head so that she couldn't see the rocks. She pretended she didn't. She did it because it kept her dry. Mother knelt in the brow of the canoe, and just when we seemed to be driving down on a rock, she would twist the paddle so that we should slip past it down a green slope between the white waters into the calm beyond. When for 3 days there had been no rapids, the river found open country with hills only in the distance. On the south bank there were gentle hills which grew steeper as we went further, and on the other there was a grassland. For a distance we could take 2 days to cross, and then a ridge of high mountains. It had been rather dull that day. Then suddenly, as we came around the curve, we saw many canoes tied to the bank. On a half-moon of closed turf, protected by a steep cliff on all sides where it flowed down to the water, men were setting up the posts for teepees. Some of the teepees already had their hide coverings in place, and we were like the one we lived in before. I looked for the bunch of feathers, which would have showed us where to land, but Mother stared straight ahead and paddled on downriver. I wished she wouldn't go so fast, for I wanted to see what the tribe looked like. It was disappointing that they had seemed quite ordinary people, no different to the ones we had sometimes seen in the distance. Then Raki pointed to a ledge in the hillside above the encampment. On it was a teepee, much larger than the rest, and it was covered with brilliant patterns in red and blue and yellow. A man stood before it. Or was it one of the great hunters? His head was crowned with feathers, many, many feathers, which swept right down to his feet. I heard Nini say under her breath, "The chief has come to watch us pass." So that was the chief, my father. I felt proud, and then ashamed that even for a moment I had been glad of a father who let Mother pass by without a greeting. We rounded a spur of rocks which guarded the eastern side of the encampment and hid it from our view. Mother let the paddles trail through the water and leaned forward as though she was suddenly tired. Ripples splashed against the side of the canoe as we drifted in towards the bank. I saw a bunch of feathers tied to a stake, and I knew that we had come to the landing. I couldn't see any teepee for us, but there were signs that someone, or perhaps 2 or 3 people, had recently come down the bank. So we followed their tracks. It was a steep climb, and Nini began to grumble that it would be hard to carry water from the river. She grumbled too soon, for when we came on an open glade encircled by great trees, we saw a teepee, and beyond it, we could hear a stream singing. "It is our teepee," Raki shouted. "I thought we should never see our own teepee again." We ran forward and unlaced the flap. Everything was there, just as we had left it moons ago. The winter blankets Mother had woven, and the wooden animals she had carved for us to play with when we were small. Even the bow, which Raki had started and not had time to finish. "The tribe can't be unkind," I whispered to Raki, "or they wouldn't have bothered to bring things which were important only to us. Or do you think it was the chief who told them?" There was a smaller teepee for Nini, though not the same one she had had before. We were glad she wouldn't share ours, for on the journey she had been cross if we talked when she wanted to sleep. That night I woke soon after moonrise to find that Mother's bed place was empty. So I told Raki that we should go out to explore before she came back. The trees stood watching the smoke rising from the cooking fire, which was still smouldering. Perhaps it was the first smoke that they had ever seen. The shadows were black and sharp, and the silence was clear as water. We went through the wood and crossed a stretch of open ground in the direction of the encampment. Behind the sharp line of the cliff edge, there was a pool of darkness, which hid the teepees. And on the far side of the great rock pointed to the sky, something moved on it. A bear, an eagle. Raki saw it too, so we lay flat to watch unseen. "It is the chief," whispered Raki. The moon escaped the clouds that were chasing her, and the light was so brilliant that we could almost see the colors of the feathered headdress. If the night had not been so hushed, we should have never heard Mother say, "Naka naka naka check." She was standing in the shadow of a soaring pine above the river. The cliff was like a bow, and she and my father held the string through which I lived, the bow in whose protection the tribe were sleeping. Again I heard her say, "Naka nak check," and I realized it was my father's name, and then she was crying. I wanted to run to her, but Raki held me back. "Lie still, Piyanaah. She wouldn't like us to be here. I don't know why, but I know she wouldn't." I watched her turn away and vanished into the shelter of the trees. Now the far rock was empty also, and their singing bow was only a curve in the cliff above a river. So, that was the first bit I'm reading. The second one is called The Tribe. I hope you like it. I liked it.